A warrior with hidden wounds. The wounds are not gone. They're the scars that remember. But they are hidden. They're not worn for pity or display. They're a private, strategic archive. This hiddenness makes you calm, because the battle has already been fought and won, in solitude. It also makes you dangerous to underestimate. The person who advertises their pain is seeking help. The person who conceals it is operating under a strict, unforgiving doctrine of self-reliance. To mistake your composure for weakness or your silence for timidity is to completely misread the depth of the reservoir you draw strength from. You're not a sheep in wolf's clothing. You're the wolf that no longer needs to howl to prove its position. This transition is the psychological analog of a pressure-compensated valve. An ordinary valve, the old self, reacts wildly to fluctuations in surrounding pressure, needing external effort to remain stable. The pressure-compensated valve, the new self, uses the very force of the external environment to reinforce its internal stability. The greater the noise or chaos in the room, the more deeply you anchor into your stillness and distance. The system is designed to thrive on the instability of others, operating with a quiet, lethal precision that those who have never faced annihilation can never comprehend. They broke you once. Never again. This is not a hopeful wish. It's a systemic guarantee. The possibility of that level of annihilation has been permanently decommissioned. The first breakage was a necessary, catastrophic failure that exposed the inherent flaws in the original design. The naive, unguarded self. The subsequent reconstruction ensures that the conditions that allowed the first breach can never be replicated. The pain of the first breaking was the price of this non-negotiable insurance policy against future harm. The world misunderstands the event, labeling the prior self as weak. This is the great intellectual error of the shallow observer. The brutal, clarifying truth: you were never weak. You were just open. Weakness implies a fundamental lack of capacity or strength. Openness implies a strategic vulnerability, a deliberate lowering of defenses, rooted in the naive belief in the goodness of others. Your prior state was not a failure of strength, but a failure of cynicism. You were open, like an unbanked vault in a city of thieves, not because the vault was fragile, but because the operator mistakenly believed the entire population was honest. This openness was expressed through two fatal errors in social conduct. You loved too honestly in a dishonest world. Honesty, especially emotional honesty, is a liability in a landscape dominated by strategic performance and self-interest. To love honestly is to present one's true heart without caveats, without protection, without the essential human filter of self-preservation. In a dishonest world, a world where every transaction is secretly measured by potential gain or loss, such honesty is seen not as virtue, but as a spectacular opportunity for exploitation. Your clarity was ammunition for their ambiguity. You gave too freely in a place that profits off taking. You operated on a system of abundance, dispensing your time, empathy, and resources without demanding equity. This generosity was misinterpreted by the predatory market of human interaction. In a place that profits off taking, where scarcity and extraction are the prevailing principles, your free giving was viewed as a perpetual, renewable resource, not an act of kindness. The taker always ensures the giver is depleted, because depletion guarantees the taker's gain. The profound error was misreading the environment. You brought the ethics of a sacred space into the marketplace of thieves. The breakage was the moment the world slapped down the price tag on your generosity, revealing it to be nothing more than an exploited commodity. The strength that now emerges is the refusal to offer that honesty and that generosity freely again. It's the wisdom to recognize that true value must be guarded from those whose sole function is consumption. When it all burned down, you learned to walk through the fire without begging for water. To beg for water is to admit defeat, to concede dependency, to place your survival in the hands of the indifferent observers who abandoned you. It's the final, pathetic plea of the vulnerable self. The refusal to beg is the first act of true self-sovereignty. It's the realization that the fire cannot be extinguished. It can only be endured. And if it must be endured, it must be done with silent, cold dignity, using the heat not to break you, but to forge you. You didn't heal, you adapted. Healing is the process of returning to the original, pre-damaged condition. It implies a restoration of the previous, vulnerable equilibrium. Adaptation is something far darker and more profound. It's the permanent, systemic alteration of the self to ensure survival in a now hostile environment. You didn't return to the person you were. You ceased to be that person entirely, evolving into a new, more durable and less feeling species. Adaptation is an admission that the old environment is forever gone and a new operating system is required. You didn't forget, you learned. Forgetting is passive erasure, the brain protecting itself by discarding inconvenient, painful data. But the quiet kind of pain does not permit amnesia. It's too valuable. You learned. Every wound, every betrayal, every silent night was encoded not as a memory to be avoided, but as a crucial piece of strategic intelligence. The scars remember the lesson, and that lesson is the only thing that guarantees the integrity of the new structure. To forget is to become vulnerable to the same mistakes. To learn is to weaponize the past. You didn't become heartless. You became careful. The world, in its crude judgment, will inevitably label your distance and your stillness as heartlessness. They'll mistake your lack of emotional performance for a lack of internal feeling. They're wrong. Heartlessness is the absence of capacity for feeling. You're not absent of capacity. You're overloaded with experience. You didn't lose the ability to care. You lost the willingness to risk caring with the reckless abandon of the naive. You became careful. Carefulness is the advanced security protocol implemented by a heart that knows its own fragility. A calculated, unforgiving self-defense mechanism that prevents the second, final breakage. It's the disciplined refusal to allow the outside world access to the vulnerability that once caused the ultimate conflagration. Every step you take is quiet. This quietness is not stealth. It's efficiency, the elimination of wasted motion, the rejection of the noisy, attention-seeking movements that betray vulnerability. A quiet step is a statement of contained power. It shows that you don't require external confirmation of your movement or direction. You're anchored so deeply in your own truth that your transit through the world is a fluid low-friction operation. It's the walk of a hunter who knows the territory and requires no fanfare to announce their arrival or departure. Every move you make is deliberate. The era of emotional impulse, of reacting to others' whims, of making decisions based on desperation or shallow hope, is over. Deliberation is the application of the scar memory archive to all current events. It means every word spoken, every alliance formed, every rejection delivered is a pre-calculated measure, executed with cold, rational precision. There's no longer room for accidental exposure or careless vulnerability. The self is a tactical instrument, and every maneuver is a defensive or strategic action. And this cold, quiet precision culminates in the ultimate expression of your new being, your silence. It speaks louder than every scream that once went unheard. The old screams were broadcasts of distress, requests for aid, validation of pain. They were desperate attempts at external communication. And because the world was deaf to them, they failed entirely. They dissipated into the atmosphere, leaving only the residue of exhaustion. Your new silence is not a failure of communication. It's a masterpiece of psychological warfare. It's a refusal to engage on their terms. When the shallow and the noisy approach you, your silence creates a vacuum that they desperately try to fill with their own insecurity and chatter. When they seek to provoke, your silence is a null response that negates their power to affect your emotional state. When they expect an explanation or a justification, your silence is a contemptuous veto on their right to jurisdiction over your life. Your silence is a fortress wall, and its lack of windows, doors, or weak points is what speaks loudest. It communicates an unshakable inner reality. I have nothing left to prove to you, nothing left to ask of you, and nothing left to fear from you. This is the language of a person who has achieved total emotional self-sufficiency. And to those who rely on controlling others through noise, this silent certainty is the most terrifying sound they can possibly encounter. Let them wonder. Let them expend their shallow, futile, intellectual energy, trying to decipher the unreadable artifact that you've become. They'll attempt to dissect your stillness, to analyze your distance, to find the familiar patterns of the old, predictable self. But the equations they rely on are obsolete. The mystery of your composure will consume them, because the simple, terrifying truth is beyond their capacity for empathy. You're entirely fine without them. Let them whisper. They must chatter, because silence is an unbearable void that threatens to reveal their own internal emptiness. They'll circulate their crude theories, their simplified diagnoses, their convenient labels: cold, arrogant, damaged. They whisper to reassure themselves that you're somehow lesser, somehow flawed, because the alternative, that you're evolved, is too frightening. Their whispers are not judgment. They're the involuntary nervous tics of those who are unsettled by perfection. Let them invent stories to make themselves feel better. The stories they create about your decline or your misanthropy are essential psychological tools for their own survival. They must craft a narrative where their abandonment was justified, where their absence was necessary, or where your subsequent detachment is proof of your failure, not theirs. You're now the canvas upon which they project their own guilt and fear. Allow them their flimsy fictions. Their comfort is irrelevant. You owe no one an explanation. Not anymore. The need for explanation is an inherent weakness, an admission that you require external judgment to confirm the validity of your existence. That requirement is now revoked. Your life is not a thesis requiring defense. Your pain is not a crime requiring justification. The only validation necessary came from the silent struggle, the nights spent building the fortress. To offer an explanation now would be to grant them a foothold back into your structure. To concede a right they forfeited the moment they chose to leave. Because they broke you once, but in doing so, they built something they can't reach. Their malice, their indifference, their calculated abandonment, all were mere tools in the service of your metamorphosis. They believed they were achieving destruction, but they were, in fact, laying the foundation for an unassailable entity. The broken pieces were merely the raw materials for the construction of your cold inner citadel. They cannot reach this new structure because it's forged entirely from the memory of their failures and is protected by the very silence they created. So walk, cold, because warmth is a vulnerability they exploited. This coldness is intellectual, disciplined, and immune to superficial sentiment. Still, because stillness is the evidence of total internal control, the lack of nervous reaction, the profound confidence of the self-contained fire. Unbothered, because you've achieved the state of emotional and existential neutrality. Nothing they do, say, or invent can penetrate the polished, hardened surface of your self-regard. And in every space you occupy, in every moment you choose not to engage, let your silence be the loudest sound in the room. Let it be the definitive statement of your final, unassailable power. It's the sound of a debt being cancelled, a judgment being refused, and a soul achieving ultimate, solitary freedom by order of the Peaky Blinders.